We all have that one person. Or maybe it's more than one. People who push your buttons, say the wrong thing, show up the wrong way, and if we're honest, it's not them, it's how we react. What if you could learn how to never feel angry or bothered by anyone? Not because they change, but because you did. Raise your hand if you've ever walked away from a conversation replaying it in your head over and over. That comment they made, that tone they used, that text they didn't send. You felt it in your chest, in your jaw, and you told yourself, next time I'll be different. Let's make that this time. You control your response, not their behavior. That sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest truths to live by. Most of us spend our energy trying to change the way other people act so we can feel better. We think if they would just listen better, be more respectful, show more appreciation, stop interrupting, then we wouldn't get upset. But what that really means is we've handed them the keys to our emotions. We've made our peace conditional on someone else's behavior. That's a dangerous place to live because it means every stranger, coworker, or friend has the power to throw off your entire day. Let me tell you what real control looks like. Real control isn't about stopping other people from acting out. It's about training yourself to respond differently when they do, because someone, somewhere, always will. There's always going to be someone who cuts you off in traffic, who talks over you in meetings, who dismisses your ideas or disrespects your time. And if your calm depends on them behaving correctly, you're going to be living in constant reaction mode. That's exhausting. That's like walking around with a tripwire on your piece, and anyone can set it off. You have to get to a place where you realize your reaction is your responsibility. It's not about being passive. It's not about letting people walk all over you. It's about choosing a response that reflects your strength, not your triggers. When someone says something sideways and you feel that fire rise up in your chest, you don't have to act on it. You can feel it, acknowledge it, and still decide not to hand over your emotional state to someone who isn't even thinking about you 5 minutes later. Let's talk about power for a second. We've been conditioned to think that reacting strongly, getting angry, clapping back, raising your voice is power. But real power is restraint. Real power is choosing not to be moved. It's being so rooted in who you are and how you want to show up that someone else's behavior becomes information, not instruction. Their chaos doesn't have to become your chaos. Their rudeness doesn't have to activate your defensiveness. That gap between what they do and how you respond, that's your power. Here's the part that takes practice. Most of us are reactive because we haven't built in space. Someone disrespects us, we feel it, we react, all in seconds. To break that pattern, you have to install a pause, a breath, a mental reminder that you have options, that you're not obligated to mirror them, because the truth is, they might never change. They might stay rude, dismissive, loud, inconsiderate, and yet you can stay calm, composed, grounded. That doesn't happen overnight, but with enough repetition, that muscle gets stronger. When you start focusing on your response instead of their behavior, everything shifts. Your energy stops being drained by things you can't control. You start responding with purpose instead of reacting from pain. And people start to notice. They might not say it out loud, but they can feel it. You become the person who doesn't get rattled, who doesn't bite every bait, who walks away from nonsense with peace still intact. That's not weakness, that's mastery. And it starts with making a choice, not once, but every single time someone tests you, and they will. That's not a threat, that's life. The test doesn't stop, but your reaction can. Silence is a powerful boundary. Most people think of boundaries as something you have to announce, loudly, firmly, with bullet points and consequences. And sure, there's a time for clear communication, but often the strongest boundary isn't what you say, it's what you don't say. Silence draws a line without needing to raise your voice. It communicates something deeper than words ever could. I'm not available for this energy. I don't need to match your chaos. I'm not stepping into this argument. And once you learn how to use silence well, it becomes one of the most effective tools in protecting your peace. Most people are addicted to noise. They argue just to fill space. They talk over others to be heard. They speak out of discomfort just to avoid the feeling of being misunderstood. And when someone says something that gets under your skin, the urge is to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to explain, to prove a point. That urgency is emotional pressure, not truth. Silence in those moments feels awkward at first. It feels like you're backing down, but what you're actually doing is refusing to play a game you never agreed to in the first place. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the fire. Some people talk to provoke. Some people complain just to pull others into their misery. Some people want a reaction, not a resolution. And the moment you realize that, you start choosing your silence carefully. You begin to recognize that not everything deserves a response. Not every invitation to drama needs to be accepted. And when you stay silent, you're not suppressing emotion. You're directing it. You're saying, I choose to place my energy where it matters, not where it's wasted. Silence also creates space, and space is where clarity lives. When you're not rushing to respond, you can hear what's actually happening beneath the noise. You pick up on intention, not just words. You notice patterns. You stay grounded, and you give yourself a moment to ask, is this worth my peace? Is this my responsibility? Is this even about me? In that space, you take back your power. You stop letting other people's urgency dictate your emotional pace. That's what silence gives you, the chance to choose presence over performance. There's also something unshakable about a person who doesn't flinch in the face of tension, someone who can sit with discomfort without needing to fill it. Silence says, I'm not here to perform for your approval. I'm not controlled by your disapproval. I don't need to validate myself to you. And that level of calm presence often shifts the dynamic in the room, because when people can't pull you into their emotional wave, they either calm down or reveal exactly who they are without your influence muddying the water. We're taught to equate silence with weakness, with avoidance, with giving up. But the opposite is often true. Silence can be a form of strength that says, I trust myself enough to not need your understanding. I don't need the last word to know my worth. I don't need to explain my boundary for it to be real. And I don't need to respond to feel in control. In fact, silence often reveals who's in control, because the person who doesn't react instantly is the person who has options. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's just a different language. One that says, I hear you, but I'm not taking this on. I see you, but I don't need to step in. I feel the tension, but I'm not making it mine. You'll be amazed what shifts in your life when you stop filling every silence with words, every conflict with noise, and every discomfort with over-explaining. Not everything needs your voice. Sometimes your stillness is enough. Detach emotion from ego. That phrase sounds clean and simple, but living it in real time takes inner work. Most of what we call anger or being bothered isn't really about the moment. It's about the meaning we attach to it. Someone interrupts you, and it feels like they're saying your words don't matter. Someone gives you a look, and you take it as disrespect. What's actually happening is your ego is interpreting neutral moments as personal attacks. The ego doesn't want to be dismissed, challenged, or unseen, so it lights a fire under your emotions to defend itself. The trouble is, ego makes everything about you, even things that have nothing to do with you. You start reading into people's tone, picking apart their body language, replaying conversations just to find hidden jabs. And suddenly, your emotional life is being run by a narrator in your head that sounds a lot like fear and pride. The moment you can separate your emotional reaction from your ego's voice, you start to experience a new kind of peace. Because now, it's not about protecting your identity, it's about protecting your energy. When your ego is in the driver's seat, every conversation feels like a competition. You feel the need to win, to be right, to have the last word. You feel tension when someone doesn't agree, and discomfort when someone doesn't validate your perspective. That kind of emotional reactivity is exhausting, and it doesn't lead to resolution. It leads to resentment. Detaching emotion from ego allows you to show up differently. You stop needing agreement to feel secure. You stop needing validation to stay calm. You start choosing peace over pride. You don't have to stop feeling things. You're not a robot. You're going to feel disappointed, frustrated, even angry sometimes. But those emotions don't have to own you. When they rise up, you can pause and ask, is this about what they did, or is this about what I made it mean? That question alone creates space, and space is where clarity starts to grow. Most offense lives in that space between what happened and what we tell ourselves it means about us. Shrink that space, and you shrink the power of your triggers. You'll notice your biggest reactions usually come from your deepest sensitivities. That's not weakness, it's human, but it's also a clue. If you feel instantly disrespected, it's likely because your ego is trying to protect a part of you that feels unheard or unseen. The more you heal that part, the less defensive you become. Instead of lashing out, you start leaning in. You start hearing people clearly without filtering everything through your insecurities. That's how emotional maturity works, not by avoiding emotion, but by detaching it from the fragile parts of your identity. Here's the shift. When you stop making things personal, you gain perspective. Not every cold tone is an attack. Not every short reply is a rejection. Sometimes people are tired, distracted, dealing with their own stuff. And when you're not in ego mode, you can see that without reacting to it. You start to realize that 90% of what bothers you isn't about the world. It's about the stories you've been telling yourself. And when you rewrite those stories, your emotional landscape becomes quieter, more stable, less chaotic. There's nothing weak about letting go of ego. In fact, it's one of the most courageous things you can do, because ego wants control, and letting go means surrendering the need to always be right, always be validated, always be defended. When emotion rises and you can feel it without obeying it, you're stepping into real strength. You're no longer being moved by every slight, every tone, every misunderstanding. You're standing in your values, not your ego. And that's where calm begins. Redirect your energy. Don't absorb theirs. It sounds like a mindset shift, but it's really a muscle, one that most people haven't trained, because by default, we absorb what's around us. If someone walks into the room angry, we get tense. If someone criticizes us, we shrink or snap. If someone's in chaos, we get pulled in without even realizing it. That's how emotional energy works. It's contagious, but you don't have to catch what they're carrying. You can notice their energy without letting it become your own. That's where self-regulation begins, not by changing them, but by channeling yourself. Every interaction is an invitation. Someone brings stress, frustration, or negativity, and without thinking, we RSVP yes. We meet them in their state. We match their tone. We mirror their volume. We give them control over our internal state. And the result, now, we're carrying the weight of a conversation that wasn't even ours to begin with. Redirecting your energy means you see their emotional state, but you don't internalize it. You choose to keep your calm even when they lose theirs. That's not disconnection. That's direction. You're deciding where your attention and intention go. There's this false idea that staying calm is passive, that if you don't react, you're weak. But actually, calmness is a form of leadership. It sets the emotional tone for the moment. When someone comes at you loud and sharp and you stay composed, you're not giving in, you're setting a boundary. And boundaries aren't always spoken. Sometimes they show up in how you manage your energy, in how you choose not to raise your voice, not to defend every word, not to let someone else's emotional storm become your weather system. You're not responsible for other people's emotional waves, but you are responsible for how you surf them. That means you can choose what to carry and what to let pass. When you redirect your energy, you're saying, I see your chaos, but I'm not making it mine. I feel your anger, but I'm not going to wear it. You learn to separate what belongs to you from what doesn't. And once you do that, you stop walking around emotionally drained from battles that were never yours to fight in the first place. It's not easy at first, because the instinct is to protect yourself with intensity. Someone gets loud and your body wants to match it. Someone gets cold and you want to shut down. But matching their energy just means handing over your peace. It takes intention to redirect your response, to say, I'm not meeting you in that space. I'm going to stay in mine. That space is grounded, steady, focused, and it's where you make the best decisions, not emotional ones, but aligned ones. That's how you shift from being reactive to being effective. Think of it this way. Your energy is currency. Every interaction costs something. And when you give your energy to emotional chaos, there's rarely a return on investment. But when you hold on to your energy, you stay in control of how you show up. You don't waste time cleaning up messes made in moments of reaction. You stay clear-headed, and more than anything, you build trust with yourself, because now you know you can walk into tension and still walk out whole. Redirecting your energy doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being wise. It means understanding that not every argument is worth your presence. Not every mood deserves your match. You lead with emotional discipline, not emotional absorption. And over time, people notice. They may not always like it, but they'll respect it. Because nothing is more powerful than someone who stays anchored when everything around them is trying to pull them under. Clarity beats reaction every single time. When emotions run high, it's easy to default to reaction. You say what you feel in the moment, you raise your voice, you send that text, you slam that door. It feels like control in the moment, but it's not. It's release. And release is not the same as resolution. The problem with reacting is that it feels right while it's happening, but it often leads to outcomes that don't reflect who you are. Clarity steps in when you choose to pause, get curious about what's happening, and decide how you actually want to show up. Most reactions come from confusion. You're confused about why they said that. You're confused about what they meant. You're confused about how to interpret their silence or their tone. And in that confusion, your mind fills in the gaps with assumptions. They must be judging me. They don't care. They're being disrespectful. Now your body is in defense mode, and you react. But the truth is, the clearer you are about what's happening, about what matters, about what you stand for, the less you feel pulled by what others do. Clarity simplifies the moment. It puts your focus back on what you can control. When someone frustrates you, ask yourself, what do I want right now? Do I want to be heard or do I want to win? Do I want to solve the issue or prove a point? That simple shift brings clarity. It takes you out of the heat of the moment and into intention. Because not every moment needs a reaction. Sometimes it needs reflection. And the more you reflect before you respond, the more aligned your actions become. You stop saying things you regret. You stop creating damage you have to clean up later. Clarity also comes from self-awareness. You have to know your patterns, know your triggers, know the moments when you tend to get pulled out of character. If you don't know what sets you off, you'll keep thinking the world is the problem. But when you know your emotional patterns, you can interrupt them. You can say, this is a moment where I usually react, so I'm going to do something different. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to pause. I'm going to give myself a moment to get clear before I speak. That's not weakness, that's leadership. When you lead with clarity, your words land differently. You stop over-explaining. You stop defending every move. You say what needs to be said, and that's it. No drama, no emotional spill, just direct, grounded communication. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who's reacting to a wound and someone who's speaking from clarity. You can't fake it. You have to do the internal work to get there. But once you do, everything changes. You stop being dragged into every argument. You start choosing your moments. You begin to lead conversations instead of surviving them. There's a confidence that comes with clarity, not arrogance, not force, just a steady kind of knowing. You know who you are. You know what you're about. So when someone challenges that, you don't panic. You don't scramble to prove yourself. You stay grounded. You speak simply. You stay in your lane. That kind of clarity doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. It doesn't use 10 paragraphs to say what can be said in one sentence. It shows up, says the truth, and leaves the noise behind. Reaction is easy. Anyone can react, but clarity takes presence. It takes discipline. It takes the willingness to slow down when everything in you wants to speed up, but the payoff is worth it. You make better decisions. You protect your peace. You earn the respect that only comes from people who choose their words instead of being driven by emotion. Clarity creates calm. and calm gives you the space to lead instead of chase.